First thing first, Camilla, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Despite the COVID, I'm all good. Yeah.
Well, hopefully you feel better soon, and it's good to hear that you're not too under the weather.
Yeah.
So, before we get into your new album, I like to jump back to the beginning quickly because you were born in Iket, in Nigeria. What kind of music was played as you were growing up, and what instilled kind of that passion for music in you?
Oh, yeah. I came over to London, West London, when I was quite young. But I've grown up with a mixture of music. My dad's Grenadian and obviously my
Okay.
mum's Nigerian. So there's a mixture of kind of Fela Kuti. My dad was really into jazz. So he
Okay.
was that got me into jazz because he has an amazing vinyl collection.
Mhm.
And particularly, we used to listen to music together on Sundays. And he was the one that introduced me to Sonny Stitts, Jackie McLean, his
Okay.
favorites, all saxophone, mainly all saxophone players. So there's no surprise that I picked up sax. He really likes Danny Turrentine. And yeah, we that was a really important like part of my musical upbringing, I think.
When you started to delve into the saxophone, did you take to it immediately, or was there kind of a learning curve to kind of get what you had in your head and what you heard on those records to kind of get that out of the instrument?
Yeah, it was weird because when I first saw a sax, it was a friend of my mum's and her boyfriend had a tenor sax and he just left it in her
Okay.
flat. And I was 8 and I picked it up. She hadn't been able to get a sound out of it, and I got a sound out, and I was like, yes. And actually, from teaching now, that quite a lot of kids when they start saxophone can't get a sound at all. So I think I was lucky in that I was able to get somewhere at the beginning, but yeah, to getting from picking up a sax and getting a sound to playing jazz was it was a long journey. That's for sure. Yeah.
And you've studied music as well, or jazz at Trinity College London. So for you, the both kind of that upbringing of all those people we mentioned, and then also the kind of the African roots music you were listening to, and kind of the more strict education of jazz. How did you kind of combine those two worlds into to kind of where you are now with your own voice?
Well, I think definitely when I was at college, obviously we were just learning the kind of basics of jazz improvisation and harmony. But I think what's made the situation was made it so that people can combine those two influences is the scene in London,
Okay.
and particular thanks for that has to go to Tomorrow's Warriors. They're an organization that I joined when I was 11. It's free and it's for kids from all backgrounds. And you have lessons with these very famous jazz musicians, some like Soweto Kinch, Dennis Baptiste, etc. And they they basically created a safe space for people to develop their skills. And out of the Tomorrow's Warriors family, as we call it, we have groups like Kokoroko, Ezra Collective, Nabaya Garcia. And it was allowing us to feel safe about embracing our cultural roots
Mm.
and merging it with jazz, which actually, even though London's quite obviously very multicultural, prior to this hadn't been such an accepted thing.
Yeah.
You played jazz straight ahead, and that was it. Um, in terms of my experience of it. And I think Tomorrow's Warriors gave us all the confidence and the space to be able to do that, to merge the two things.
Yeah, when did you started to create your own compositions? When did you kind of get those ideas that you had in your head out into something tangible?
Um, well, it was around the 2014, no, it
Okay.
must be earlier than that. No, 2012, 2013, around then, I did a Venus Warriors project with Courtney Pine, who I've known for a while. I knew him through Tomorrow's Warriors. and everyone was bringing their own compositions, but I had none, so I chose like one of my favorite standards, and he really gave me a bit of a telling off and said, you really need to be writing your own stuff. At that time, I hadn't really occurred to me to do that, and I think I didn't have the confidence, so it took a while. I started my project in 2014, and it's just been a learning curve since then to now. And I continue to learn in terms of writing. I'd like to get better at things like arranging and stuff like that. And you just continue to learn, I guess, the more you do it.
Can you share one lesson that you've learned that was instrumental in kind of getting your skills to where they are now from where you started?
I think the one lesson I got is from one of my favorite musicians, Kenny Garrett. Kenny Garrett obviously is a ridiculous saxophone player, but the thing that gets me with Kenny is his compositions, because it's so different to what I heard at college, where everyone was fighting to write these pieces that were in 13/8 or whatever, and they sounded hard, and they didn't, basically sounded like exercises. Well, his pieces, when you look at them harmonically, they're actually quite complex, but they don't sound complex. They're quite like lullabies, some of them, if you like sing a song. And I really like that aspect of creating music that is accessible, but you don't have to dumb it down. I think it's a real skill. You could there are people that just write stuff that's on one chord or whatever. Not to say that that's dumbed down, but he writes stuff that it sounds easy and it's singable. It's not necessarily, and that's what I really like about composition.
Yeah, because when you released your first album, then what was that a big step for you? Where kind of putting out your own first body of work?
Yeah, I mean, I'd done an EP before then, but I knew nothing about releasing music and had done it
Right.
completely by myself and basically just printed the CDs off and was handing them out at gigs. So that didn't get picked up at all. Yeah, it was a big step, and it was hard, and a lot of lessons learned from it. It was hard work, and I'm sure, and I made mistakes, and everyone makes mistakes, and then you learn from it and you keep going. But looking back, I'm proud of the what we achieved.
Yeah, because one thing I always find interesting is I talk with a lot of musicians about the industry in a way where it is a volatile business. A lot of people pursue music for passion, and there are a lot of uncertainties you have to deal with along the way. So what keeps you strong in those moments where you've had a bad gig or something? What keeps you motivated, or what keeps you focused on what you want to accomplish?
I think having a bit of a life outside of music as well to get a perspective. I was very lucky. Another saxophone, UK sax player, had quite similar like history to me and kind of root into music. And same with my piano player, Sarah. So it's me, Soweto, and Sarah, we both did. Sarah did English at Cambridge. Soweto did history at Oxford.
Okay.
I did ancient and medieval history for my
Okay.
first degree. I know, crazy. Mainly because my dad really didn't want me to be a saxophone player, because I discovered my granddad, his dad was a sax player, and he didn't think it was a kind of reputable thing. Obviously, I did just ignore him like he became a saxophone player. But to appease him, and also because I was interested in history, I did this first degree. And I made some friends, like friends for life, who they do all kinds of things, none of them to do with music. And it's actually really nice to have a kind of friendship group that's not music related, that you can get a perspective on what we do, because I think sometimes it just becomes so much. And as you say, if you do a bad gig, you're so in your head, and it's actually quite nice to hang with people that don't think it's the end of the world if you like didn't play a good solo, for example.
Well, because I read something about Ronnie Scott's club, and you said something about confidence and perseverance of where when you have a bad show or you feel like you've had a bad show, you just keep on pushing, you keep on going.
Yeah, Yeah, I think so. I think you have to, but to get that strength, you have to have a wider view on life, I think, to be
Mm,
like, okay, yeah, that was bad. I didn't play well, or didn't go well, or this is really stressful. Let's carry on. I think the more I've like further I've gone in music, the more stressful it's become. I
okay.
kind of thought when I was starting out, oh, but when I do this, when I play this place, I won't have any worries. And it's
Mm.
like, no, they're like 10 times worse. But
Yeah, that's what I found with growing older, right? I found that you have in your mind like when I turn 30, I've got it all figured out, but then you kind of realize, okay, no, it's still the same, and you still have all things to figure out. So, um, well, it's interesting that you mentioned kind of your educational background because does that obviously there's an interest in your heritage culturally and based on your roots, but is it also almost an academic interest as well in the history of your people?
yeah, I think so. Definitely during lockdown, which is when I started the research and like finishing off this album. It was really interesting to like I was reading people's dissertation
Mm,
papers, and my mum's got quite a lot of books on African history,
okay.
US African history. And I really got into it. And I think, yeah, part of that is because I like the historical aspect of it and I find it very interesting. And there's loads of stuff that I learned about the BBO people that I didn't know before.
Yeah, because your previous album, The People Could Fly, was already inspired by a lot of slave tales, I believe,
Mm.
or a specific book. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, so it's a book of African folk tales which are based on
Okay.
slavery.
I,
Um, yeah.
no, and then I see this album. Maybe you see it differently. But it feels like a continuation of some of those themes and kind of the exploration of both historical and cultural exploration. So you mentioned that deep dive that you did during COVID. Is there one thing or one story that really stuck out to you?
Yeah, there were a couple like the tune that I wrote, the long Shrine of Arochokwu. That's a really interesting one because obviously that is actually in the, it's in the village of Eket,
Mm,
uh, and just the thing of like the it was where people would be tried,
mm,
and if they were found guilty they would go down these kind of they call them the slave routes. So it's these little tunnels, and the tunnels would be going down to the beach. Now, if they were found guilty, apparently the water was supposed to turn red.
mm,
And the innocent people were returned to their relatives. And it's, yeah, so the Long Juju slave route is just like a dark series of tunnels.
mm.
And they'd say that the guilty would disappear, the sea would go red. In actual fact, it's like mythology mixed with a sad history of slavery because they will be
Right.
actually transported to boats, waiting boats, and then taken along this slave route. And it's quite interesting because it is something that's quite an unpleasant fact of slavery that um, African people were kind of roped into. They were also enslaved, but in a different way to helping slavers.
Right.
Um, and that was something that really stood out to me because yeah, it's like people thought that they were they've been found guilty and they were actually being taken on to slavery.
Right. And when you have something like that, a story like that, a heavy subject like that, and then everything that goes along with it, as a creative, as a songwriter in a way, how do you then try to capture that musically, or is that kind of more afterwards that you kind of find these themes?
No, I do try and capture it musically. I mean, that one I knew I was going to collab with Sanity, a Birmingham-based rapper who I've been very lucky to have done a few tours. The last one we did together was with Pee Wee Ellis, but obviously before he passed away.
Mm,
And I sent her the story so that she could encapsulate that in her lyrics. So on that particular one, that's how we did it. Um, Generally, I always have that the story in mind when writing because I
okay.
think that's what I think, probably coming from the like literary or more academic background, I find that quite inspiring. I've always liked stories, and that's probably what inspires me more.
Right. There was a tagline, I think, in the bio or something, that this album was a celebration of roots, creation, and community. And I want to focus on the community aspect a little bit because you mentioned all these names and people that you play with in your band. And what is that community like that you have created for yourself with the people, the musicians around you?
Well, yeah, it's great. I mean, that's the UK jazz scene for you, a certain part of this new UK, whatever they're calling
Hmm.
it. Um, it is a community. I think we're community and family. I mean, it starts with Tomorrow's Warriors because we all came from, most of us came from Tomorrow's Warriors, and we found each other there. And it's just this big network of people. It's like the other day I was going to getting a ridiculously early Eurostar, and I saw Dan Casimir, my bass player. I saw Chelsea Carmichael, who I know, and it's like there's just this web of community that has been created. I think probably in a response to the lack of community that
Hmm.
was there previously, particularly amongst ethnic minorities in the jazz world in the UK, but specifically, I guess, London facing in London. And
Hmm.
that's how the Warriors came about. There was a thing called the Jazz Warriors, which Courtney Pine was part of, and Gary Crosby. And then they created this Tomorrow's Warriors to create this community, this safe space for people.
Yeah,
And I think
what is,
that's,
oh, sorry.
no, I was saying I think that's what it
No,
was.
because of you mentioned kind of this free space where people can express themselves in the way they want to. So how has that influenced the choices you make now? If you take this album, how has it influenced kind of the ability to talk about, for instance, those slave routes, or how has it kind of expanded what you can do?
I think it's given us a confidence to do so. Obviously, I was not anywhere near producing my album before this, the UK scene exploded, but I do
Hmm.
remember what it was like, and being in college. Like, if you'd have presented an album at that time that dealt with themes of slavery, I don't think, in terms of that UK market, that it would have gone down that
Hmm.
well. Perhaps like internationally, but also what's happened with the UK scene is opened up the channels to Europe and the
Right.
international, like the US. I think those places are now more aware of London. So it would have flopped for sure. And I think that's the thing that this scene has allowed. It's this thing of like, you can be a jazz musician, but you can embrace your African roots, because actually, at the end of the day, that's where it came from anyway. The original musical jazz came over from the African enslaved in the US.
Right. And having, well, this is maybe a weird question in between, but when was the last time, or have you been back to kind of the Nigerian coast recently, or?
I haven't. No, my cousin Idara was very keen for me to come, but obviously with COVID,
All right.
it was a bit of a no go. And now I'm back to, as everyone is, I think, back on this crazy touring schedule. So I don't have the time, but I would like to go probably in 2023.
Okay.
Particularly, I mean, I'd love to play there. I just want to go back to my village to hustle people to give me.
No, because it feels like have you, how should I phrase this? Have you kind of learned something about yourself by doing this deep dive and exploring kind of the origins of your tribe and the people that you're descended from?
Yeah, I think so. And I think I've really started to think about what I stand for personally as well, which I don't know. I think I knew, but I think looking at my roots and looking into these things of slavery, especially with UK politics situation, is,
Sure.
you start to think, okay, yeah, it's definitely made me more political, I think.
And on the musical side, I mentioned community, and now there's some in the second song, "Journey Across the Sea." I hear a kora, and then there's all these kind of little elements of not only African instrumentation, but kind of again those community, musical community. So how do you, from an arranging standpoint, kind of figure out what to add to which song, and when to let the piano do its thing, and when you can do your thing?
Yeah, well, I produced the album with my very good friend Tom Harrison, who's another alto player. We met
Okay,
first day at music college. Actually,
okay.
he auditioned after me and they took us both. I thought I'd kind of got in. They kind of said, yeah, we really like you, but you're the first person to audition. So, we'll get back to you. And then I heard him audition and he was ridiculous. And I was like, oh, no, that's it, not getting. But they took us both. So we've been really good friends since then. He's a fantastic musician. We thought a lot about how we were going to arrange the pieces. He actually did the horn arrangements on that piece, which are beautiful. And that piece was the only one really that was a collab in terms of myself and Cordiali got together and we worked on this piece and then I fleshed it out basically because he doesn't read music or in that sense, but he's an amazing musician. So we thought we wanted to do something together, and we got together and did a lot of playing, and then we came up with that. So I really wanted to give him a moment to shine in that, and we just had to work out how we were going to make that with all the people. It's a big band on that.
Yeah, and that's kind of what you mentioned just now, being back on the road. Now, what is it like being back on the road after those 2 years that we've had? But also, the band is quite big, and it is quite an undertaking, I suppose. So what is life getting back on the road again for you?
Well, yeah, I mean, sadly, we can't. I'm not taking the full bands.
Okay,
We mainly tour as a quartet. Now, I think with Brexit and the remnants of COVID, I don't think there's as much money even to take a 5-piece. So I go out as a 4-piece, which is
okay.
fine. I've reduced the music and it works. It's stressful. That's what it's like on the road. It's very stressful. As I say, Brexit has made it very annoying for
Sure.
UK musicians. And then the whole flight situation, we've lost the cymbals 4 times in a row. So that was it's
Okay.
but having said that, with all the stresses, it is nice to be able to go back, particularly Europe. I really missed not being able to play some of those festivals.
Sure. And with the album coming out, then what do you hope that people hear it once you play it for people? What do you hope they take away, or can they take away anything, or do you want them to think about certain stuff, or?
I think it's hope and joy, which I think is the essence of any music, but particularly jazz. It's something that really strikes me when I look at pictures of people, in the 40s and 50s going to bebop clubs. The joy and the sense of fun and the fact that people were dancing. It's a thing that I think, particularly in the UK, got forgotten when jazz went, it was more or less only for concert halls. There's nothing wrong with that, but it was a dance music. And I like the aspect that people can dance to the music. Don't have to if you don't want to, but I like that aspect. And I hope that that's my music is some part of bringing that aspect of jazz back.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. And this is the last question that I have for you. But with what you just mentioned, why do you think that is? Why do you think that jazz kind of got this reputation of being somewhat reserved, or everybody just being somewhat is it just British culture? Is it what is it?
It might be, yeah, because when you go to New York, people are more raucous in the clubs.
Sure.
Um, I think so. I think it was a kind of probably in Europe and as well. Maybe there was, dare I say it, a slight appropriation in
Mm,
terms of trying to intellectualize a music that was already quite very deep, but deep
right.
levels, and maybe that kind of trying to align it with a classical mentality, meant that some of these aspects of the joy and the dancing aspects were taken away, because obviously, you know, in some of our beautiful halls, you wouldn't expect somebody to get up and be dancing along,
Right.
you know.
It's a shame, actually. It would be fun if people would dance in the Royal Albert Hall, I think.
It would be, yeah. I'd be 100% like to bring that back, but yeah, you never know.
Well, it sounds great, and I wish you all the best with everything that's going to happen in the next couple of months. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me.
Oh, no worries. Thank you very much.